Hello, friends, and welcome back to Stories About Entitled People. Let's start our video with a story in which OP finds themselves caught in the middle of a growing company's broken alarm system policy. As the employee living closest to the office, OP was roped into being the contact for burglar alarm calls. But before we begin, best way to support our channel is to leave comments, like, and subscribe with the turned-on bell so you don't miss the new video every single day. Here we go. Put me on the alarm notification list, but don't give me any guidelines? Good luck. My employer was a medium-sized business, approximately 50 employees at the time, and I happened to live right across the street, about 3/4 of a mile from our office. Shortly after I started working there, they asked me if I would mind being listed as a contact for the burglar alarm since all the facilities/admin people lived pretty far away and I was right across the street. They said anytime the burglar alarm goes off, someone has to drive over to meet the police. Don't ask me why, I don't really understand the policy. At the time, I was a young, naive, recent college grad and figured I would try to be helpful and told them I didn't mind. Our internal company policy was if you accidentally set the alarm off, you immediately call the police on the alarm company's list in order so they know it's a false alarm and they can tell the alarm company to ignore it. At the outset, this worked pretty well. I'd get a few false alarm calls a year, but I'd always get an apologetic call from the employee that set the alarm off, so I'd just tell the alarm company to ignore it. Then the company started growing, and we started having more and more false alarms as we had new employees that would forget about the alarm. And then we started having employees that would ignore the policy and would just leave after setting the alarm off without notifying anybody. After I got wise to this, I started telling the alarm company to ignore everything, even if I didn't get a call, because we started getting charged false alarm fees, and I figured there was a 99% chance it was a false alarm. I figured we shouldn't waste the time of the police or waste company money paying false alarm fees. I brought this up in a meeting with our COO, and they crapped a brick and insisted that we couldn't ignore alarm events because what if someone really did break in and somebody was working late? They could be at risk. So I said, okay, staff need refresher training because they aren't following the policy to notify me of false alarms, so we're going to have a ton of police dispatches for false alarm events. COO minimizes the issue and insists the current policy is fine and no retraining is necessary. Anytime I got an alarm call without someone notifying me of a false alarm, I followed the policy and had them send the police. There were 2 or 3 false alarms where the police showed up, found nothing, and sent us a bill. The very next call, I sent the police like the policy said, and right as they were pulling up, they saw a vehicle pulling out of the parking lot and chased it. The employee that got chased? Yeah, it was the CEO. In addition to getting chased, he ended up getting cited for speeding as well. The next day, COO tries to pin this on me like it's somehow my fault, to which I reply, I just followed the policy you gave me. The next day, the entire company went through refresher training on alarm procedures, and I was taken off the alarm call list. I count it as a win. Tried to pin it on you somehow? How the F does he get dressed in the morning? He knew that was a losing battle. The police already beat sense into him and made him realize the whole thing had been his fault from the beginning. Why did he pretend for a second to think he had any way of pulling you down? Why did he pretend that he hadn't learned the lesson he undeniably did learn? What is he, a masochist? And our second story. Moral of the story, do not bite the hand that feeds you, I guess. This is my father's story. We're not native English speakers, so expect some confusion. To give some background, my father's side of the family, his father, 70 years old, my grandfather, GF, passed away in an accident about 10 years ago. His mother, my grandmother, GM, 76 years old, a retired farmer, she injured her back while working as a farmer. She underwent a couple of back surgeries, which my father paid for, refused to follow the doctor's orders, and became partially disabled as a result of an unsuccessful physical rehabilitation. For about 20 years, she lived off her children's income. His oldest brother, my first uncle, Paul, 57 years old, lives with his family and provides almost no financial or practical support to GM, but he lives close to GM and visits on occasion. My father, 56 years old. His younger brother, second uncle, Mark, 54 years old, divorced because he cheated on his wife. He had a high-paying job but spent all of his money on his mistress's cars and houses. When he ran out of money to spend on his sides, he took out an extensive loan to buy more things for his girlfriends, but he refused to pay for his own daughter's college fund. By the way, LMAO, and went into debt. Mark and my father hate each other because Mark believes my father is overly critical and demanding about what he does. His youngest sister, my auntie, 48 years old, was 48 years old, and her daughter, my cousin, CO, 18 years old, lived with GM. Auntie was also divorced because her husband was abusive. She was the primary caretaker for GF and GM, and she did all the housework. However, she was also laid off as a result of the pandemic and faced significant debt. In the same year, she ended her own life. My father has provided the majority of their income since he was still in his 20s because he worked in a different town and had a well-paying job. He'd been sending the majority of his salary to his parents to the point where he didn't have enough money to save or live a life appropriate to his income. He even told me that he was unable to pay for my college because he must send money to GM and the program I want does not have a scholarship. My country requires at least a bachelor's degree, so I had to go to a nursing school that provided full financial aid, a free dormitory, free meals, and the scholarships installments. The year my aunt passed away, 2019, my parents had no choice but to retire sooner than we had planned for a decade. They returned to my father's hometown and became GM's full-time caretaker and housekeeper. At the same time, Mark returned to live with GM after being laid off and suffering bankruptcy, became a freeloader, doing nothing but drinking, smoking, gambling, and flirting with more women, using my parents' money, obviously. I also have to send 60 to 70% of my salary to GM's house because my parents' savings are not enough to cover additional freeloader living costs, GM's mortgage, all their debts combined, and CO schooling and allowance. This almost wiped out my parents' savings, but my father was never a favorite child for some reason. Despite the fact that he contributed the most money, caused no trouble, and was always available to help GF and GM with anything, medical bills, running errands, etc. Despite this, GM only believed Mark and always scolded my parents without hearing their side of the story. GM also enjoys pretending to be delirious and pooping or peeing all over herself as a punishment, forcing my parents to clean up after her. They took her to the hospital several times because they worried she had dementia, age-related regression, or something. But doctors confirmed that her brain function, thought process, and orientation are completely fine. The recent event that broke the camel's back. GM went to check her bank account. As I said before, she's fine physically and mentally except for being senile and having back pain. She discovered that her balance had dropped by about $5,000 over the last 10 years. She immediately accused my parents of stealing her money, which they did use, but they tried to explain to GM that they use all of her savings to help pay for her everything because they're running out of money and no longer have a steady source of income. She became enraged, telling everyone she knew that my parents had stolen her money. So after several years of being free caretakers and housekeepers, my parents decided to move to live in the same town as me, and they paid a large sum of money for a moving service, 500 kilometers, 300 miles, to move every necessary appliance, such as a refrigerator, washing machine, air conditioner, and so on, which my parents had used their money to buy for GM over the years with them. So GM no longer has any appliances, caretakers, or extra money to spend. I hope her golden child will be there for her from now on because we're no con. It's absolutely amazing they've took advantage of your parents for long enough time for your parents to have a life without paying, got others good luck to them and their happy future. And our last story. I'm not letting my neighbors access land that's technically theirs. I live outside of a small town, so the houses are spaced out and each land plot's pretty large, about 2 acres or more. Part of my property includes a decent-sized pond, though I don't own all of it. About half the pond's on my land, another quarter belongs to a neighbor right next to me, and the remaining quarter belongs to someone who lives farther away and isn't involved in this situation. There's a dock on my part of the pond, right on my land, but close to the property line. It has a gate with a lock and a passcode, and it's the only real way to access the pond near my property and my immediate neighbor's house due to weeds around the rest of the shore. The neighbors next door are a couple in their early to mid-30s with a 9 or 10-year-old son. I've lived here for a few years, but never really got to know them well. There's another neighbor who lives a bit farther away, about 40 years old, with a 15-year-old son, and I know them much better. A few months back, the 15-year-old asked if he could fish at my pond. I know him well enough to trust him. He's responsible, and I figured it wouldn't be an issue, so I gave him the passcode to the dock gate and told him he could come and fish whenever he liked, as long as he made sure to lock the gate when he was done. No problem there. But then my next-door neighbors, the ones with the 10-year-old, came over and asked if they and their son could use my dock to fish and keep their kayaks there. I didn't feel comfortable with that, especially since I didn't really know them well, and there's a big difference between letting one responsible teen fish and letting a whole family use my dock and store boats on my land. I politely told them no, explaining that I'd rather they didn't since we didn't really know each other. That's when things started to get tense. They got upset and said it was unfair because even though the dock is on my land, it's the only access they have to the part of the pond that's technically theirs. They argued that I was restricting their access to their own property. I told them they could clear the weeds on their own side of the pond if they wanted easier access, but I wasn't comfortable letting them use my dock and definitely not keep kayaks on it. They didn't take that well. They wrote me a letter, this time respectfully asking for permission to use the dock, as if a written request would change my mind. They also pointed out that I let someone else, the 15-year-old who lives a bit further away and doesn't own any part of the pond, use the dock, so why shouldn't they, who actually own part of it? I still said no. They've been pestering me about it ever since. And it's clear they're not planning to drop it anytime soon. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.